Hey everybody, how's it going? It's Joe, and today I'm going to show you 5 of the most unexpected borders within the United States. So, for most of the United States, where most of the people live, you're going to see borders that kind of make sense according to some kind of physical object or some kind of feature of that land. For example, with New Jersey and the border between Pennsylvania as well as Delaware, you're going to see the Delaware River separate the states from each other, and the Hudson River up north between New Jersey and New York. Other times you're going to see mountains separating borders from one another, as you might see down south, for example. But this isn't the case for every border within the United States. For example, in the western part of the United States, you're going to see a lot of what will appear to be straight lines separating states from one another. But what you might not know is that a lot of these lines aren't actually as straight as they might appear from a view farther out. And what I'm going to show you in this video today is 5 borders that appear to have straight lines, but aren't actually that straight. And the first one that we're going to go into is perhaps my favorite one, and that's the border of Oklahoma, Texas, and New Mexico. So from a distance, this looks like, the panhandle of Oklahoma goes all the way up, and it meets New Mexico at the same part as that western part of Texas. But when you zoom in on this border, what you're going to see is that that actually isn't true. For whatever reason, the panhandle of Oklahoma does not reach as far as Texas. And if we measure the distance, which is obviously a very handy tool within Google Maps, you'll see that it's actually just about 2 miles different between one point and the other. And that might seem a little bit strange to you, and you actually can even find that there is a border monument right there, a tri-state monument, to show that this isn't some kind of error with Google Maps. By the way, none of these are going to be errors having to do with Google Maps. These are the actual borders between the states. I've checked that all beforehand. But yeah, so you might wonder, why is it this way? But things are going to get even weirder. So up next, let's go a little bit further up north, where we're going to look at the border of Montana, South Dakota, and Wyoming. And here we're going to see something pretty similar. Montana and Wyoming look like they meet up at the same point, at least further out, but you zoom in, you zoom in, you zoom in, now you're like, this looks a little bit weird, and then you go all the way in and you realize that, wait, this isn't a perfect meeting point, and that's a really strange thing to view. And actually, if you zoom in even further, you'll see Montana, Wyoming, and South Dakota. There isn't a point where they meet perfectly and create 2 right angles. It's just a weird mess. When you look at Montana on a map, for example, you're never going to see it looking like this, because this isn't what people think of as the border. I bet you a lot of people that live in these states don't even think of it. And the actual reason as to why so many of these borders are like this, and you can see again the corner of Montana and South Dakota, not a perfectly straight line. Doesn't make that right 90-degree angle that you might expect. But the reason why it's like this is actually because of the people that first divided the state lines back, many years ago when we were first creating all of these new states. So what we did is we had surveyors who would go out and they would basically be told to draw some kind of straight line. Like, for example, between Canada and the US, you're going to see an actual straight line. And they make a parallel and they tell the surveyors to make a straight line, and then from there, that's going to be your border. But surveyors are only humans, and those kind of mistakes that they would make changed the actual borders of states, which is pretty interesting to me, because you can see here, like, this looks almost right. In fact, between Wyoming, South Dakota, and Montana, you'll see that the distance here is only about 5,000 feet or so, but obviously that's not perfect. So when surveyors made these mistakes, eventually I'm sure it was realized, if not right away, but probably later, there was really no point to change it. Like, nothing really is going on in this most eastern part of Montana. If you go all the way up and all the way down, you'll see there's not really anything here. There's no notable towns. There's some roads, obviously, that cross between South Dakota and Montana. But there's nothing really notable in that little sliver of land, and you'll find that as we go all the way up. And that's something that I find to be pretty interesting. So what we're going to go over with the 3 rest of these is going to be other surveyor mistakes. And the next one that we're going to go to, one of the most famous border points within the United States, is the 4 corners. Utah, Colorado, Arizona, and New Mexico. Obviously, the most famous border in the U.S., probably, because it's the only point where 4 states all meet together at the same point. But what you might not know is that they aren't really a perfect straight line going in. It's close. New Mexico did their job, Arizona did their job, but then you have the border between Colorado and Utah. And here you'll see that Utah is going perfectly straight down, and then it kind of juts off to what we see as the right. And the reasoning between this, it could also be the surveying errors, but my theory that I have as to why this border is the way it is I think that they built this monument for the Four Corners Monument, and then they realized it wasn't actually where the border was, because this is a very slight difference if you go all the way down and you go here, distance to here, and then we'll go to the actual point between all of the different states, and you'll see this is less than 80 feet difference. This is really not much of a difference at all between what the actual border is and what it would be if it was a straight line. So I think they built the monument and then they realized that this had to change. One of the most iconic borders in the United States, but might not actually be what you think it is, which I think is pretty strange. So one of the next ones is probably one of the most unsettling ones to me when I first found it out. And it's the border of California, Oregon, and Nevada. So up here, you got Nevada going over, and then for whatever reason, it starts to slant down, and then it just goes straight down before it actually meets up with California. I couldn't tell you why this doesn't match up perfectly. Again, it's probably some kind of surveyor error, but for so long, at least, the first 18 years of my life or so, I thought that these borders met perfectly at the same, at the same point. But that's not actually true. You see it even when you zoom in a little bit, you're like, this looks a little bit weird. And then you're like, yeah, this is just not what I thought it was. Oregon, California, Nevada, I don't know what you're doing. You can go to the end of a trail right here. I don't know if there's any points. You can see this right here, what it looks like at this point once this loads up, and there you go. You can see there's nothing here in any direction. It looks like it's some really beautiful scenery, actually. I would love to go here, even though it seems a little bit hard to get to, a little bit of a long hike to get over there. But really interesting, in a border that is probably unexpected and that you didn't know before. So the fifth border that I'm going to talk about in this video is definitely another strange one, and that's the border between Colorado, Nebraska, and Wyoming. Again, this is going to be a pretty similar thing to what you've seen before, only a little bit different, because in this case, you have a border that is completely straight, and then it kind of makes a slope down. What you see before is you see, some kind of straight line, and then it makes an all of a sudden turn, and it's no longer going in that same direction. But what you see here is more of an increment, right? Like it's a little bit more sloped as Wyoming and Colorado. All of a sudden that border goes a little bit further down south, and then once it goes to meet back up with Nebraska, it goes north again. I couldn't tell you exactly why this is, other than just the basic assumption that this is some kind of surveyor error, but it's the way it is. So one last thing that I wanted to talk about in this video is why this is the way it is. Like, obviously these surveyors many hundreds of years ago made mistakes, and they didn't make the borders the way that they were told to, or the way that they meant to make them. But why hasn't this changed? Obviously, within the time period of, the leaders of these states finding out, why haven't they asked for any of their land back? And the answer is honestly just that there is nothing here. There's nothing for these states to argue about, right? Like what you see in border disputes all around the world is that if there's nothing there, no oil, no people, no civilization, it's not really worth creating a big argument about. It's more of a waste of resources than any resources that might be there. And that's what you see here. These aren't unique countries, these are unique states, but they're all part of the same country in the United States of America. So the question is, what state would find it worthy to have some kind of border dispute over another state for what ultimately means basically nothing at the end of the day? Now, there are some cases where there are legitimate border disputes between states. One of the more famous ones is obviously between Oklahoma and Texas, the Red River. There's an argument over what states, owns the river, per se. The Red River rivalry you might hear in college football between Oklahoma and Texas, obviously a huge rivalry, but those states have had arguments in the past about who owns the river. And if you want me to make a video about that in the future, I'd be happy to do so. Again, this is something I'm trying out. I'm hoping that you all like this video and that it does well. But yeah, let me know what you think. I'd be happy to hear your opinion. Feel free to drop a comment, like, dislike, whatever you want to do. It's all cool with me. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them. And yeah, stay inquisitive and have a good one, everybody.